for joining us. The Washington State PASS team has put a series of videos together to help PASS students learn essential writing skills as PASS students complete their courses. In this video, we'll review tips for developing a strong thesis statement, topic sentences, and transition statements. Let's get started. What is a thesis statement and why is it so important?
Thesis statements are one of the most difficult things for our students. As a teacher, I have found that just about every student struggles with this. So the resulting problem is that without a strong thesis statement, the rest of the paper that they're writing becomes very disorganized because they have nothing to tie it back to. So in this following video, we're going to give you some ways to develop a strong thesis statement that, when combined with a strong topic sentence or sentences and transitions, will result in a cohesive paper that makes sense. As mentioned in our video on introductions and conclusions, an introduction has 4 distinctive parts: the attention getter, the identification of the title and author, the questions that create dilemma or a problem, and then a thesis statement that will attempt to deal with the problem or identify how the author deals with the problem that is created with those dilemma questions.
It sounds like the thesis statement is kind of like a compass for a writer. It guides them as they develop their transition statements and their topic sentences, giving them a place to touch back and make sure they're going in the right direction. Can you share an example of a thesis statement?
Here is an example of an introduction. It happens to have 3 authors. Most of our texts just deal with 1, and there are a couple that deal with 2 authors, but in this case we're going to look at 3. So at the beginning you can see I have the hook. An unjust law is no law at all encapsulates a problem that men have grappled with for centuries. Most notably, George Orwell in Shooting an Elephant, Martin Luther King Jr. in Letter from Birmingham Jail, and Henry David Thoreau in Civil Disobedience. I've got my hook, I've got my authors and my titles, and now I'm going to create my dilemma. In all 3 texts, the authors are examining what our obligation is when we are faced with injustice. Do we take an unpopular stand like King and Thoreau? Or do we sell our soul like Orwell in order to be liked? And now the thesis is going to be dealing with how these men handled themselves when faced with injustice. So although human nature would side with Orwell, to be truly human in the best sense of the word, eliminating laws that distort the soul, we must take the difficult path, taking on the role of thermostat, like King Jr. and Thoreau, rather than the role of thermometer as Orwell. So the thesis statement checklist, you've got to look at your introduction and say to yourself, does the thesis statement follow the writing prompt? Is the thesis statement included in their introduction?
Got it. So after we write our introductory paragraph with our thesis statement, what's next?
If it is, then you're ready to move on and begin outlining. Because to have an organized paper, you really do need to have some kind of an outline. And the way I have students do it is to come up with some logical topic sentences. And in this case, we're looking at 3 different authors. So it makes sense that each paragraph would be about each of these 3 authors, and the first sentence in each paragraph would be how they handled themselves when faced with injustice. Okay? Then, with these body paragraphs, you would add details, quotes, specific examples that would support the topic sentence and also support the thesis statement.
Thank you for sharing that tip on how a writer could use an outline to organize the paper. I can't wait to learn more.
So the outline for body paragraph 1 I chose to start off with George Orwell because of these three men, he's the one that took the easy way out. So I'm going to show how not to handle yourself when faced with injustice. I have my thesis statement off to the side here. You can see I have a topic sentence that is going to deal with how to handle yourself, but in his case, I'm going to give examples of how not to handle yourself. And then I'm going to elaborate underneath each one using quotes from the text, insight that I have, that I've come across in the story, and anything else that will develop that example. Be specific and don't be afraid to elaborate. Our students have a really hard time elaborating. Then I would come up with a second and a third example that deal with how he faces injustice. Then I'm going to look before I move on and decide, okay, does my topic sentence point back to the thesis? If it does, great. Do all of my examples support the topic sentence of how not to handle yourself? Well, if they do, then great. You're ready to move on to the next paragraph.
Wow, this is helpful information. Can you share a little more about the transition statements that appear in the second and following paragraphs?
Now I'm going to have a transition statement that's going to lead me into the next body paragraph. So actually, this sentence here is going to be the first sentence, and it will precede the topic sentence. So unlike George Orwell, who killed an innocent elephant to avoid looking like a fool, Martin Luther King challenged the immoral laws of segregation, stating the need to be a thermostat that controls what society does rather than a thermometer that merely measures what society does. So this is actually a phrase at the beginning. So there would actually be a comma here, and it would lead right into that topic sentence. Then I am going to give 3 examples with supporting details that show how Martin Luther King was a thermostat who changed society and its views on segregation. As you're having the students reading texts and coming up with examples, make sure those examples cover the whole essay or story. So example 1 would be taken near the beginning of the text. Example number 2 should come somewhere near the middle of the text, and example 3 should be closer to the end of the text, so that you're getting a wide perspective on how they handle themselves. Okay, make sure that transition makes sense. Make sure the topic sentence supports the thesis, and it does, because it's going to look at how he handles himself when faced with injustice. Do all of the examples support this topic sentence? If you have anything that doesn't show how he handled himself in this fight against segregation, then you need to change the example. Make sure they point back to the topic sentence. If you can say yes to all of those, then you're ready for the next body paragraph.
Thank you for clarifying how to use transition statements and the placement of transition statements. 2 last questions. Do you have any other information for students developing additional body paragraphs within their essay? And last but not least, what type of checklist would you share for writers who are trying to check their transition statements and topic sentences?
Follow the same steps I outlined on the previous paragraphs. Make sure again that you have a transition sentence in between the paragraphs that connect to the upcoming idea. Make sure that each paragraph has a topic sentence. Make sure that the topic sentences point back to the thesis statements. Okay, if you can say yes to all those things, then you are off to writing a really good, organized essay.
The Washington State PASS team thanks you for your time, and we hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget, check out our YouTube channel for other videos with helpful writing tips.